Cassia Rourke set the chipped cup of coffee on the table, her hands trembling as if the porcelain might shatter under their weight. She leaned closer, her breath carrying the bitterness of sleepless nights. "The pizza isn't fresh," she whispered. "It's all frozen. They make us lie." Across from her, Harlan Vayner sat hunched in a frayed coat, his cap shadowing his face. The words hit him like a blade, but his expression did not flinch. He swallowed the shock, hiding the fury that clawed at his chest. Outside, rain drummed against the glass neon light, flickering in frantic spasms as though the city itself recoiled. From the corner booth, an old man muttered over a greasy plate, $30 for this garbage." In that moment, the weight of deception pressed down on the room. One careless truth had torn the veil, and nothing in Leon's empire would ever feel the same again. Cassia slumped against the cracked window of the bus, her head nodding in exhaustion after another dawn-to-noon shift. In her palm lay a crumpled fistful of coins, damp from the sweat of her grip. They were all she had to show for hours spent moving between greasy counters and demanding voices. On her shoulder, 7-year-old Lyra slept, her cheek pressed into her mother's jacket, clutching a child's drawing of a stick-figure woman wearing a cape and the words, "My mom is a hero." The irony stung, but Cassia could not wake her. The drawing was truth in Lyra's eyes, even if the world outside turned it into a cruel joke. The bus rattled past dim storefronts, street lamps clicking on as the sky deepened. Cassia glanced at the clock above the driver's head, 5 o'clock. For most, the day was ending. For her, another shift was only beginning. The door to Leon's swung open with a hollow chime. Cassia stepped into the kitchen air, thick with stale oil that clung to her hair and clothes. The sharp tang of oregano barely fought its way through the grease. A coworker muttered without looking up, short-staffed again. Figures. Cassia forced a nod, tying on her apron as if strapping on armor. Across the dining room, in the shadows of a corner booth, a man in a worn cap lowered his gaze to a stained menu. Harlan Vayner, buried under his disguise, took in the peeling paint, the warped tables, the emptiness. The place was nearly deserted, yet the atmosphere pressed heavy, suffocating. Every surface seemed tired, every face worn thin, as if the restaurant itself had forgotten what it once promised. Cassia inhaled, bracing herself for hours of pretense that would drain what little remained inside her. Cassia approached the corner booth with a weary smile that faltered at the edges. Her voice cracked slightly as she unfolded the laminated menu, reciting the words she had memorized long ago. Harlan raised his eyes. "What's the best thing here?" His tone was casual, but his stare lingered. Cassia hesitated, glancing at the kitchen door as if it might answer for her. "The deep dish," she said, forcing brightness. "Famous recipe. People love it." The lie left a bitter taste. Her fingers tightened on the menu grease, smearing the plastic surface. It was an unspoken confession. The truth was right there, staining her hands. Harlan nodded as though convinced, though inside disbelief churned. The distance between them narrowed not with trust, but with the silent weight of what was left unsaid. Something fragile had begun, an invisible thread tying a weary server to a man she thought was only passing through. At a corner table, an elderly man fumbled with his wallet, swiping a battered card again and again until the screen flashed red. His hands shook as he whispered apologies to the server, shame flickering across his wrinkled face. Cassia stepped forward without hesitation. She pressed a few bills into the register, her motion quiet, her voice absent. She offered the man his receipt with a practiced smile, making it seem like nothing unusual had happened. He nodded in gratitude, too embarrassed to speak. Harlan caught every detail, the quick glance Cassia cast around to ensure no one noticed the way she brushed off the man's thanks, as though kindness was a luxury she could not afford to claim. Her generosity, hidden beneath exhaustion and silence, was not for recognition. It was instinct as natural as breathing. Watching her, Harlan felt the first sting of guilt for everything his company had become. The office door banged open, and Denton Crales strode out. His shirt was wrinkled tie hanging loose, his voice cutting through the air like a whip. "Move it. Customers are waiting." He stalked between the servers, snatching envelopes from their hands. "Tips go here. Don't make me ask twice." His thin smile left no room for refusal. Cassia slid her own envelope into the pile, her eyes lowered. Rage flickered in her expression for the briefest moment before she buried it beneath silence. Denton pocketed the envelopes with the casualness of routine theft, then turned away, unconcerned. The staff's faces remained blank, carved masks of endurance. From his booth, Harlan studied Cassia. Every fiber of her posture screamed resistance, but her survival demanded surrender. In that instant, the small kindness he had just witnessed collided with the quiet oppression before him, exposing the system that fed on people too tired to fight. Hours later, Cassia sat at her kitchen table, the hum of the fridge filling the silence. She emptied her apron onto the surface, worn singles coins scattered like fragments of a life constantly breaking. She stacked the bills, counting twice, then a third time, each total falling short. Her whisper cracked the air. Enough for rent, yet there was no answer. Lyra lay curled on the sofa bed, one arm around her notebook, pencil still in her grasp, dreams pulling her away from arithmetic she had not finished. Cassia reached over and brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's cheek. For a moment, she let her hand rest there as if contact could promise stability. Then she turned back to the pile of money, staring at it as though sheer will might transform it into enough. But nothing changed. The weight of reality settled again, and with it the unspoken fear of tomorrow. Harlan leaned forward, breaking the silence between them with a question that seemed harmless. "Do you like working here?" His voice was calm, almost casual. Cassia gave a small humorless laugh, the kind that carried no joy. "We just do what we're told." She adjusted the tray in her hands, her eyes drifting toward the kitchen door as if it might swallow her whole. Her voice dropped lower, softer, carrying a weight he could not ignore. "Honestly, I feel ashamed every time I set one of these plates down." She did not linger, moving quickly to another table, but the words clung in the air like smoke. Harlan's gaze followed her. For the first time, the cracks in the routine became personal. It wasn't just poor service or fading decor, it was dignity slipping away with every lie told. Something within him shifted, drawn toward her honesty, disguised as weariness. As Cassia cleared dishes and wiped a counter already clean, her mind spiraled inward. She rehearsed the same argument she had whispered to herself 100 times before. "If I tell the truth, I'll lose this job. If I keep quiet, I'll lose myself." The thought pulsed with every step she took, a rhythm of despair beneath the motions of work. She glanced at Lyra's drawing tucked into her apron pocket, folded carefully like a fragile relic. Hero. The word stung now. What kind of hero lied for a paycheck? She kept her smile for the customers, but inside she was unraveling, caught between survival and integrity. Each shift was a slow betrayal, not just of strangers who trusted her, but of the child waiting at home who still believed her mother's hands carried honesty. The conflict never left her. It lived in every breath and every order she carried out without conviction. From his corner booth, Harlan studied her with an intensity he kept buried beneath lowered eyes. Cassia had no idea who sat at her table. No idea the man in the worn jacket was Harlan Vayner, owner of the empire, whose name flickered in tired neon above the door. He replayed the rumors that had reached his boardroom: spoiled food, stolen wages, customers leaving in disgust. Executives had assured him it was nothing more than exaggeration, market changes, the unavoidable decline of tradition. But sitting here watching Cassia's honesty slip out in guarded fragments, he knew the truth was deeper. He wasn't here for the food. He was here for her words, for the reality his own managers would never admit. Beneath the disguise, his mind sharpened with resolve. This was no casual visit. It was the beginning of an inquiry that could either save his legacy or bury it forever. The door banged against the wall as Marcus Eden staggered out of the kitchen, 4 trays stacked in his trembling arms. His uniform clung to him, soaked with sweat collar stained from hours of labor. He balanced plates with the precision of desperation, whispering to no one in particular, 14 hours, and I haven't eaten." His voice cracked like it had given up resisting. The dining room was nearly empty, yet Marcus moved with the frantic pace of someone who knew there would be no relief. Customers complained about cold food. He forced a smile anyway. Harlan's gaze locked on the boy, barely a man. Shoulders bowed under the weight of exhaustion heavier than the trays. Anger pressed into his chest. Marcus was not simply tired. He was being drained, reduced to machinery in human form. For Harlan, it was no longer rumor. It was slavery dressed in uniforms and paper hats. From his corner booth, Harlan slipped a small notebook from his coat. He angled it beneath the table, the pen moving in quick, firm strokes. Staff treated like slaves. 14-hour shifts, no breaks. Each word dug into the paper, a record that could not be smoothed over with boardroom excuses. He noted the emptiness of the room, the peeling paint, the plates returned untouched. He wrote the boy's name, Marcus, burning it into memory. The act was discreet, almost invisible, yet for Harlan it was a declaration. No longer detached, no longer theoretical, the abuse had a face, a name, a moment. He closed the notebook, slipping it back into his coat with the practiced ease of a man who had learned how to hide truth in plain sight. From the outside, he looked like another tired customer. Inside, he was building a case piece by piece against his own creation. The next stop reeked of bleach and spoiled produce. In the kitchen, Sarah Wiles bent over a cutting board, picking through a bundle of lettuce leaves spotted brown and curling at the edges. Her fingers shook as she scraped away the rot, forcing the rest into a bowl that should have been discarded. Her lips moved in a whisper not meant to be heard. "My boy needs his medicine, but this check won't cover it." A tear slipped down her cheek, landing on the wooden board, mixing with the bitter smell of decay. She straightened only when a manager barked for speed, her spine stiffening in reflex. Harlan watched from the doorway, his jaw tight. It wasn't just corners being cut, it was dignity being shredded alongside the produce. The lettuce, the kitchen, the woman herself. They all bore the same story: survival stitched together with shame at the cost of everything human. In the cramped break room, Denton Crale stood with a clipboard, his shirt half untucked, his voice sharp with impatience. "Sign it. 30% of your tips go back to management. Company policy." His words left no room for refusal. One by one, the staff bent over the page pen, scratching under the weight of silent fear. Ashlyn Vare, no older than 17, clutched the pen so tightly her knuckles whitened. Her eyes flickered toward the others before she scrawled her name, the paper trembling beneath her hand. Denton smirked, collecting the signatures like trophies. No customer would ever see this document, yet it carried the essence of theft legalized by intimidation, legitimized by silence. From the hallway, Harlan observed the transaction, his chest tightening. This was not incompetence or neglect, it was orchestrated corruption. Each signature on the page was another bruise on the spirit of the very people carrying his family's name. Later that evening, Harlan sat at a booth, a plate steaming before him. He lifted a slice of the so-called signature deep dish, the crust bending limply, cheese stretching in uneven strings. His teeth sank into it, meeting resistance as though chewing on rubber. The taste was hollow, the sauce metallic, the promise of authenticity absent. At the next table, a middle-aged man grimaced. $30 for this? It's like chewing a tire, he muttered to his wife, pushing the plate away. Harlan froze, jaw-tightening fists pressing against the table's edge. He had heard the reviews, the criticisms, but feeling it firsthand was different. This wasn't merely bad food, it was betrayal baked into dough fraud sold by the slice. Every customer at every table was swallowing a lie, and his silence made him complicit. The weight of it lodged in his throat heavier than the rubbery crust on his plate. When the shift slowed, Cassia passed by Harlan's table, sliding her phone across with a fleeting glance. On the screen glowed an image, an invoice stamped with the Leon's letterhead. $4,000 for premium mozzarella, she whispered, careful to keep her face turned away. She swiped again, revealing a photo of the actual shipment, shabby boxes of discount cheese labels faded, stacked in a corner of the storeroom. That's what we really got. The difference was staggering, not just in quality, but in integrity. Harlan studied the images, his stomach knotting tighter. The document was legitimate. The product was not. The gap between them was theft, systematic, deliberate. Cassia's voice carried a quiet fury. "We lie to every customer who walks in, and management tells us to smile while we do it." He handed back the phone, his fingers lingering. The first piece of undeniable proof had just landed in his hands. Rain streaked the windshield of the battered sedan as Harlan sat parked in the shadows. His phone buzzed with a new message, the screen glowing cold board preparing emergency sale. Buyers circling, assets at risk. He read it twice, the words slicing deeper with each pass. A sell-off would erase decades of labor legacy traded like scraps at auction. His reflection in the glass looked older, heavier, as if the betrayal etched lines that had not existed before. He thought of Cassia, of Marcus, of Sarah, faces bent under the weight of his neglect. Selling now would abandon them to wolves who would strip the bones even cleaner. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles whitened. In the quiet of the car, the reality sharpened. The rot wasn't only in the kitchens, it stretched to the highest floor of his empire, and soon it would consume everything he thought he owned. In the cramped break room, Cassia sat hunched over a styrofoam cup of noodles, the steam long vanished. She lifted the fork with shaking hands, slurping a bite, then pressed her fist to her lips as a sob slipped free. Tears blurred the broth dripping silently into the cold strands. She kept eating anyway, chewing through grief as though hunger left no room for dignity. From the hallway, Harlan saw her unseen himself. Something inside him twisted sharper than anger, sharper than guilt. It was sorrow. Cassia wasn't just a cog in his empire's machine. She was a mother, a provider breaking quietly in corners no one noticed. He realized then that the cost of the company's corruption wasn't measured in profits or market value. It was measured in the tears that fell into bowls of cheap noodles and nights stolen from a child waiting at home. That truth struck him harder than any ledger. Later that night, Harlan walked past the side street near the restaurant. The brick wall, once blank, now screamed with jagged red paint, Leon's lies. The letters dripped fresh, angry, impossible to ignore. He stopped the chill cutting deeper than the wind. Passers-by glanced at the words with knowing looks, shaking their heads. The judgment wasn't confined to dining rooms or whispered reviews. It had spilled into the streets, carved into public memory. His family name, once pride, was now poison, scrawled like a curse across concrete. Harlan stood frozen, staring at the graffiti until the lights of passing cars blurred around him. He could almost hear his grandmother's voice. Food was meant to be love, not deceit. The wall bore the verdict the people no longer believed. Shame pressed down heavier than rain. Reputation wasn't slipping. It had collapsed, and every dishonest slice of pizza had helped write those words. Cassia leaned against the counter, her shift nearly done, exhaustion pooling in her eyes. Her voice trembled not from fatigue but from something deeper. I don't fear the hours. I don't fear the work. What I fear, she paused, her gaze fixed on the floor, is my daughter growing up believing lying is normal. That dishonesty is just part of surviving. Her confession hung heavy, a truth stripped of any pretense. For a moment, the room seemed to shrink around them. Harlan opened his mouth, but no words formed. Silence was all he could offer, silence that carried both shame and recognition. He thought of the empire that bore his name, built on promises of tradition and authenticity, now forcing mothers to doubt the lessons they taught their children. Cassia's words became more than a lament. They were an indictment. A question lingered unspoken. What kind of world was he leaving behind? Hours later, Harlan drove through the storm wipers thrashing against the sheets of rain. His jaw clenched, his reflection flickering in the windshield with each flash of light. He spoke into the solitude of the car words that were more vow than thought. If I don't stop this, everything collapses. The company, the people, even the truth itself. The steering wheel vibrated under his grip as the car pushed forward through flooded streets. He thought of Cassia's trembling smile, Marcus's bent shoulders, Sarah's tear on the cutting board. They weren't isolated tragedies, they were symptoms of rot, spreading unchecked. For years he had trusted numbers reports, polished explanations. Now the truth stared at him from broken faces. The choice was no longer abstract fight for the company's soul or surrender it to ruin. In the echo of rain on steel, Harlan made his decision. He would uncover it all, no matter the cost. Harlan's resolve hardened, yet even as conviction steadied his heart, a darker truth loomed unseen. Cassia's whispered confessions, the fraudulent invoices, the stolen tips, they were fragments, threads of a much larger fabric. He could sense it in every corner of silence, every glance exchanged among managers who moved too confidently. He thought he understood the scale of betrayal, but the reality was far more sinister. Beneath the surface of frozen pizzas and forged signatures stretched a network designed with precision, hidden in plain sight. The restaurants were not merely failing, they were being used, twisted into something far more dangerous. As Harlan gripped the wheel tighter, one thought surfaced with chilling clarity. What Cassia had shown him was only the tip of the iceberg. The rest remained submerged, vast, and waiting. The storm outside mirrored the storm ahead, a storm that would demand more than observation. It would demand confrontation. They stood in the dim light of the nearly empty dining room, silence pressing heavier than the stale air. Harlan's voice was low-weighted with something he could no longer hide. Cassia, I'm not just a customer. My name is Harlan Vayner. The words landed like a blow. Cassia froze her eyes, widening mouth opening, then closing again as if her breath had been stolen. The worn jacket, the quiet notes, the questions that never fit suddenly, every detail rearranged into truth. He was the man whose name glowed in flickering neon above the door. The man who owned the walls that trapped her, the man who could have changed everything with a single command. The revelation hung between them, sharp and undeniable. For Harlan, it was release. For Cassia, it was betrayal. What had been fragile trust now trembled on the edge of shattering, and neither could look away. Her voice broke before her words did. "You watched me break. You watched me cry in back rooms, eat cold noodles, pay for strangers with my own tips, just so you could collect evidence." Her tears came hot, streaking her face faster than she could wipe them. "What am I to you? A case file. A pawn." Her chest heaved with anger, sorrow bleeding into fury. Harlan's lips parted, but no defense would suffice. Silence wrapped around him like chains, every word she spoke cutting deeper than the last. He had meant to understand, to witness, but to her it felt like cruelty, a masquerade at her expense. Cassia's fists trembled at her sides, the force of her grief more devastating than rage. For the first time, Harlan saw her not as a victim of his failing company, but as someone wronged by him personally. Their fragile bond cracked, leaving only raw fracture lines. Still trembling, Cassia yanked her phone from her apron pocket, unlocking it with hands that shook from fury more than fear. "You want proof? Here." She thrust the screen toward him. One image after another filled his vision, an invoice charging thousands for premium cheese paired with photos of cheap substitutes stacked in dusty corners. Payroll slips showing hours, erased pay, withheld. Grainy shots of a warehouse at night, trucks unloading unmarked boxes. Each swipe of her finger revealed another fracture in his empire, another glimpse into rot deliberately concealed. Harlan scrolled his pulse, quickening the reality, unspooling in ruthless clarity. This wasn't negligence, it was conspiracy. His empire wasn't bleeding, it was being gutted. Cassia's voice cut through his shock. "I've been carrying this for months. Every photo a risk. Every photo a reminder that one wrong word could cost me my job, or worse." Her proof left no room for denial. Cassia's eyes darted to the door before she leaned closer, her voice barely audible. "I heard them say it. Chicago is only the beginning." The tremor in her tone carried no drama, only fear carved deep by overheard truths. Harlan's chest tightened as the words sank in. If this wasn't isolated, if the fraud stretched beyond city limits, then what he thought of as an infection was in fact a system. He pictured trucks leaving warehouses under false invoices, money siphoned across state lines, his name painted over every transaction as the perfect disguise. Cassia clasped her phone tighter as though the device itself might betray her. Her whisper was more than revelation, it was a warning. What they had uncovered so far was not the sickness itself, but only the fever. The disease ran deeper, wider, reaching into places Harlan had not yet dared to imagine. His silence now was heavy with dread. Cassia pressed play on a recording, her hands trembling so violently she almost dropped the phone. A low, gravelly voice emerged, casual, almost amused. "An apartment fire. An accident at work. Small matters. Handle it." The name Silas Gorin flashed on the screen, a man Cassia had never seen, but whose words turned her blood to ice. She pressed pause, the silence that followed louder than the rain outside. "That's me," she whispered, her whole body shuddering. They were talking about me. Her lips parted, but no sound followed, only the shallow rhythm of panic. Harlan felt his own breath quicken as the truth sharpened. This was no longer about fraud or stolen wages. This was survival. Cassia's life was a line item in someone's ledger, expendable for the sake of secrecy. The threat was not abstract, it was immediate, deliberate. For the first time, fear pressed against both of them with equal force. In the glow of his laptop, Harlan scanned the contracts Cassia had collected. His stomach twisted as signatures emerged in cruel clarity. Maribel Stroud, his trusted financial strategist, authorizing vendor agreements with shell distributors. Corwin Hale, a man he had once toasted as a friend, countersigning approvals that funneled millions into shadows. He flipped page after page, each document confirming what he no longer wanted to believe. This was not rogue managers siphoning pennies from tills. This was his board, the very guardians of his company, orchestrating the theft with precision. Betrayal radiated from every line of ink, every false stamp, every polished name. Harlan leaned back, the realization cutting deeper than rage. The conspiracy wasn't eating his company from the outside, it was rotting it from within. Those seated around his table of trust had already sold him out. And now he was alone in a war he hadn't chosen. The papers spread across Harlan's lap told a story louder than any voice. Each invoice, each signed contract bore the same name, Midwest Hospitality Group. At first glance it appeared ordinary, another vendor among many. But the patterns bled through numbers that never matched shipments that never arrived, accounts funneled into places no auditor could trace. He dug deeper, cross-checking with Cassia's photos, and the truth crystallized. This company wasn't a partner. It was a mask. A shell constructed to disguise rivers of money flowing beneath his restaurants. Frozen pizzas and wilted greens were only the surface. The true product moved invisibly, laundered through the very business his grandmother had built. Harlan's chest constricted as he realized the scale. Midwest wasn't just fraud, it was the keystone holding together an empire of lies. And every day his silence gave it shelter. The name no longer felt corporate. It felt like a curse. Cassia sat with her hands clenched around her phone knuckles, white tears slipping freely now. I don't want riches. I don't want miracles. I just want my daughter to grow up knowing truth isn't weakness. Her voice cracked raw with the kind of pain that can't be rehearsed. Lyra thinks I'm strong. She drew me as a superhero. But every night I lie. To customers. To myself. To her. She pressed her palms against her face, sobbing into the silence between them. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than any accusation. Harlan felt the guilt burn his chest. For her, this was not strategy or legacy. It was survival. The desire was simple, human, undeniable, a mother's plea for dignity in a world determined to strip it from her. Every document, every scheme, every betrayal shrank against the clarity of that single truth: she just wanted her daughter to live honestly. The room seemed to close in on him, the air thick enough to choke. Harlan's voice was steady but hollow. If I stay silent, you die. If I speak out, the company dies. The words hung like a sentence, condemning them both, no matter the choice. His empire, once a monument of pride, had become a prison of contradictions. He looked at Cassia, her face streaked with tears, her eyes begging for an answer he could not give. Silence threatened to crush him. He thought of the boardrooms, the investors, the headlines that would shred his reputation. He thought of Lyra's drawing folded in Cassia's pocket, a child's belief that her mother was a hero. The weight balanced unevenly between survival and justice, between one life and thousands. For the first time, Harlan understood no decision would leave him whole. The cliff's edge loomed, and one step in either direction would break everything. The storm raged outside, but the storm within was louder. Harlan's voice cut through the silence with a weight Cassia felt in her bones. We face them tonight. No more delays. His eyes burned with resolve, but shadows of doubt lingered in their corners. Cassia froze her breath, catching. Part of her longed to hear those words, the promise that someone with power would finally fight back. Yet fear coiled around her ribs, facing the people who controlled her every paycheck, the same ones who whispered about her death like it was paperwork. She searched his face for hesitation, but found only iron determination. Trust flickered in her eyes, fragile but real. The air between them thickened with the unspoken truth there would be no turning back after this night. Whether they emerged whole or broken, this vow bound them together. For the first time, the fight was no longer hers alone. The car hummed against the wet pavement, headlights carving through sheets of rain. Harlan drove with a grip that made his knuckles ache, his jaw locked against the tremors of doubt. Beside him, Cassia sat, stiff hands clasped tight in her lap. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't emptiness, it was a current thrumming in sync with the rhythm of the wipers. Every beat reminded them of the storm waiting ahead. Cassia glanced at him once, catching his reflection in the window, a man carrying both guilt and defiance. Harlan caught her gaze, then returned his eyes to the road as if words would break the fragile courage building between them. The city lights blurred past, indifferent to the reckoning brewing in a single office tower. Their breathing, shallow but steady, became the only rhythm they shared. By the time the building rose in the distance, their silence had become resolve, solid and unshakable. The marble hallway stretched cold and endless, the sound of rain muffled behind heavy glass. At the far end stood the door, dark wood, polished brass handles, a threshold to betrayal. Orson Caldwin waited there, his suit immaculate expression, unreadable eyes, sharp as if measuring every step. Cassia's pulse hammered in her throat as they approached. She reached for the handle, her hand trembling before resting firmly on its curve. Her chest rose with a deep breath, courage drawn from places she had never known she possessed. Harlan stood at her side, shoulders squared, ready to reveal truths that could unravel everything. Behind that door waited the people who had stolen wages, destroyed reputations, and spoken of her death like a task on a list. The silence before the storm stretched unbearably thin. Cassia tightened her grip on the handle. The choice was gone. Only confrontation remained. The door loomed waiting. The hum of polished voices filled the vast boardroom. Executives leaned over glossy reports, their laughter brittle, their words clipped with the arrogance of power. The air stank of expensive cologne and quiet deceit. The doors opened with a sharp echo, and all heads turned. Harlan strode forward, rein still clinging to his coat, a heavy box in his arms. He set it on the table with a dull thud that silenced the room. "The meeting starts now," he declared, his voice iron. Papers rustled, chairs shifted uneasily. Maribel Stroud's smile faltered, Corwin Hale's brow arched, but none spoke. The presence of Cassia behind him sharpened the silence, her uniform out of place amid suits and silk. The contrast cut deeper than words, a waitress standing in the halls of power carrying truths weightier than balance sheets. The confrontation could no longer be delayed. Tonight the lies would meet their reckoning. The silence stretched until Cassia stepped forward, her shoulders trembling but her voice steady. "My name is Cassia Rourke." She began, eyes sweeping the room, "and this is the truth." Executives who had never glanced twice at her before now stared, caught between disdain and unease. She spoke of double shifts of wages, stolen in envelopes of food, passed off as fresh though it arrived frozen in crates. Her words carved into the polished wood of the table, into the polished faces of those who had profited from her suffering. She was no longer invisible. Her pain was now testimony, her humiliation weaponized into evidence. Harlan watched, struck by the transformation. This woman who had whispered shame into the shadows now spoke it like fire into the light. Cassia wasn't just a witness. She was the voice of everyone crushed beneath the weight of greed, and the room could no longer look away. Harlan reached into the box and placed a small device on the table. With a press static gave way to a voice low, deliberate, dripping with malice. "An apartment fire. An accident at work. Small matters. Handle it." The voice of Silas Gorin filled the room, every syllable slicing through the silence. The executives froze, faces drained of color. Cassia gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her body trembling as the threat against her life played out in the open. No one spoke. Even those long practiced in deception had no script for this moment. The casual cruelty of the recording shattered the thin veneer of respectability that had cloaked the board. For years they had buried truth under contracts and signatures, but here it was undeniable and raw. The boardroom, once a place of control, now stood as a courtroom, the guilty cornered by their own words. Maribel's lips twisted, words spilling fast. Forged invoices, lies, all of it. Corwin's denial came louder, yet his face betrayed him, pale and rigid. The board murmured in unease until Orson slammed his palm on the table, the crack reverberating like judgment. "You destroyed this legacy," he thundered. Silence followed, heavy and damning. No polished excuse could soften the evidence stacked before them, nor the recording still echoing in memory. Their power, once absolute, now looked brittle, exposed under light. The empire they hollowed out stood before them, no longer shielded by papers but condemned by truth itself. The thunder outside seemed to fold into the room as footsteps stormed the hall. The door swung wide and agents in dark jackets surged forward. "FBI, don't move." Hands yanked Maribel from her chair, steel cuffs locking around her wrists. Corwin sputtered protests before being forced against the wall, his tie askew, his defiance crushed beneath authority. Gasps scattered across the room, chairs scraping back. Cassia stood frozen, her hands trembling, yet her eyes gleamed with something, fierce recognition that justice so long buried had finally clawed its way into the light. For the first time, hope outweighed fear. The room held its breath. No arguments, no bargains, only the faint rustle of papers sliding from the table, scattering like broken promises. The empire built on deceit crumbled not with fire or fury, but with silence, an ending sharper than noise. For years, lies had stolen wages, dignity, and trust. Now the silence declared something new. Fraud will be exposed, corruption will be punished, and truth will always surface. What collapsed tonight was not just a company, but the illusion that greed could last forever. In that stillness, one truth remained: integrity is profit. No thief can steal.